Well, folks, glad to be with you. Glad you're with me today. As we look at the weekend edition, we'll cover some of the stories, just the top stuff of the last week that's going to affect what you can expect to see this week at home and abroad around the world. Thanks for joining in, especially from Canada and the US. And we see our numbers continue to go up. I appreciate that. And keep the comments coming and give me some advice on how I can serve you better in this regard. So this week, we saw the so-called major project announcements done by the federal Liberal government. And some of those are stalling already, coming out of the chute, especially any that are related to energy items and related to pipelines. We do have, wherever there seems to be a pipeline that's being projected that's going across land that is deemed to have priority to First Nations. There are First Nation groups who desperately want to be part of these projects, and they get 51% of them. And then there are always several that oppose it. And the government is kind of straddled here because they said nothing's going to move ahead unless it gets approval with First Nations. But you've got First Nations fighting among themselves. It's going to create a bit of a problem here. And it's why some of these projects are stalled right coming out of the gate. The Prime Minister is also heading over to the UAE, to the United Arab Emirates, and he's going to be talking about some business-related stuff, but there's a lot of pressure on him to be raising the issues of the horrendous atrocities that are going on in Sudan, and the U.S. seems to be making more progress with the UAE in terms of getting them to take responsibility for some of this. Canada continues to be somewhat muted on this. I can recall a number of years ago when the Sudan crisis, and notably it was in the area of the Darfur region, was causing just horrific atrocities, wholesale slaughter of children and villages being burned down. I was at the UN and I actually mentioned to the ambassador from Sudan, I said, any thoughts on what we can do about the Sudan, maybe help you with the Sudan crisis? And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, what crisis? So the forces that be in Sudan, which are primarily the Islamist forces, don't seem to recognize that there's a horrific problem going on there. We'll see what kind of success the Prime Minister has in raising the issue. Canada is notably shy on any issues related to whether it's genocide or whether it's related to slaughter of the innocents. If it comes to Islamist forces within those countries. Now, be careful here. I'm not saying all Muslim people. I'm saying there are a number of Muslim countries that allow these horrific extremist Islamist groups to rage and rampage free. And certainly Sudan being one of those, but also the Canadian government very silent, very shy to raise the issue of what's going on in Nigeria. And we have to ask ourselves, is that because it's just Christians that are being killed there? Christian children that are being slaughtered? Christian women that are being taken as sex slaves and hostages? The question keeps coming up, why doesn't Prime Minister Carney and the federal Liberal government raise the concerns also about what is going on in Nigeria from these Islamist forces? Not raising that and showing fear, that actually is true. That's what I would call Islamophobia. The left would like to say Islamophobia is whenever somebody raises a concern like this, you must be Islamophobic. But I say true Islamophobia is having a fear of being criticized by Islamic governments and Islamic countries. So a lot of people hoping the PM speaks up on this while he's in the UAE. On the issue of crime, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute just came out with their second volume on crime studies and reporting, to no surprise to any except in the mainstream media, that violent crime continues to be on the rise. And this time in their report, they didn't just focus on a few cities. They looked at 20 cities across the country, so cities in various sizes, and it's across the board, crime rising. Violent crime, which is attributed largely to young or youngish men. And we reflect there. I mean, there's all kinds of studies that go on saying, why is it with these young men? I go back, you can go back as far as you want in history, but one of the areas where I agree with former President Barack Obama when he was asked about the crime rate among young men, certainly in Black communities, and he said he attributes that the biggest problem that they have in the Black community is absentee fathers. Now, I would go a step further than that and say absentee fathers in any community is going to result in young men being more open to being invited into gangs and becoming violent. And we'll let the sociologists talk about that all they want, but it's very clear that that's the case. So we're seeing young crime, violent crime with young men, but we're also seeing anything that is drug related, drug addictive related. And again, there needs to be a sober reflection in terms of policies of these so-called safe sites, free drugs being applied, people helping you to shoot up or smoke up. Those policies clearly are not working as drug-related crime, property crime, and other domestic crimes continue on the increase. Now, in Seattle, we see yet another city, we talked about that early in the week, joining New York City in voting in a socialist, someone who declares themselves rabidly socialist, extreme socialist. And there's lots of different reports on why is this, and is it, Gen Z, you can't buy a home, or affordability. The single greatest problem with socialism, and that causes them to get support, and I'll just make this as basic as possible, is free stuff. When any group or people are told that they're just going to get a whole lot of free stuff, the party, unfortunately, in these modern times of politics, it seems to be emerging, the party that promises the most free things, whether it's homes, whether it's food, whether it's healthcare, whether it's bus rides, whether it's grocery stores, the party that promises the most free stuff tends to be the one that will win. And this, we can look at the sociological roots of that all we want, but the less you teach on personal responsibility and how to help one another, and the more you rely on government and look to promises of free stuff, the more you're going to get these socialist candidates winning the day. On the tariff war, again, I say I've never approved of tariffs, never like it as policy generally, and it may be starting to sink in to President Trump now that the tariffs always, of course, are a tax on consumers. Whatever product is going to get that's coming into your country that's going to get hit with a tariff, that means the price of it will go up because the tariff is added to the cost of that product. And that's where you're going to see rising costs. And the President of the United States has just announced that they're going to be lowering the tariffs on incoming beef, incoming coffee, and a few other food items because the politicians there are realizing people are starting to get angry about paying big prices for those products. So let's see if the tariff reductions continue. We'll look for those announcements coming up this week. In the investment world, we see Bitcoin since mid-October. Bitcoin has dropped in value about 30%. Now, that's not to say it's disappearing. It certainly isn't, because over the last 10 years, it's openly declared as being the best asset class for investment in terms of percentage increase, but going through a bit of a challenge right now in terms of some softening on the price there. And we're also seeing that in the NASDAQ markets, in the equities markets. Remember, when we say equity, we're talking about stocks, basically, not bonds, which is government borrowing, but stocks. The stock market, again, nervous. Anytime there's uncertainty in the market, anytime the government is not clear in terms of what they're going to be doing relative to taxes and relative to spending, you're going to get some softening in these equity markets. NASDAQ certainly being a real factor there, and some of the other markets. Some people get confused when they hear the words monetary policy or fiscal policy. So just in case you struggle with those, and it's understandable, monetary policy is basically policy that is set by the banks or the central banks, primarily interest rates. So the issue of interest rates moving up and down, that is monetary policy. And think of that in terms of the banks set that. Governments are technically or supposedly not able to be the ones to say the interest rate will be this or that. There's some speculation that governments will attend to appoint people to head up their national banks that they can have some influence on, but interest rates is monetary policy, not so much or not at all, supposed to be dictated by the government. So, and that goal there is supposedly is to control inflation and to try and keep employment levels high. That's monetary policy set by the banks. Fiscal policy, that's the policy that government controls. So that's basically taxes and spending. My view, of course, as a conservative economist and a former minister of finance, I can tell you that I believe lowering taxes provides incentive and provides stimulus and will always create a more vibrant market, will always lead eventually to more jobs and more prosperity. And governments that are on the left-hand side of that equation will say, let's tax people more, let's get more money. But if you remember from your youth the story of the goose that lays the golden eggs, the more you fleece that goose, the more the eggs will leave your province, your state, your city, or even your country and go other places. So fiscal policy, government controls that, and that's basically taxes, spending, and deficits. AI stocks, AI, of course, there's a prediction of a bit of a bubble here. Anytime there's an area that's particularly hot and heated in the investment community, people want to jump in, and as they jump in great numbers, the values shoot up, and sometimes the values actually get a little out of range and they come sliding down. Some people are saying there's an AI bubble about to burst there. We'll wait and see, but one of the things we know for sure, AI stocks are softening a bit because AI, the development of artificial intelligence, and the great prospects that can bring to so many areas of our life and improving the human physical condition, they need those centers, as you've been reading and hearing, require huge data centers to be able to power the type of research that's being done by these unbelievable AI capabilities. And what's happening there is those centers are, it's being seen, they take a lot of power out of the grid that goes to cities and goes to your usual demands for electric power. And so what you're seeing happen here is the development of entire electric grids, smaller than maybe an entire city grids, but grids that can be dedicated completely and dedicated to one of these huge data centers. And remember, these data center that can be built can be half the size of a decent sized city. So what we're watching there to power those grids, and some of the electrical generators that are being developed for this, and this is a very positive thing, are actually developed by run by liquid natural gas, which burns a lot cleaner than coal and other products. But governments, that left-leaning governments especially, that are terrified of the extremist climate people who are supported by mainstream media, think they'll lose votes if they look like they're doing anything with increased development on refined natural gas and refined oil products. So government, foolishly being intimidated by mainstream media, is sort of backing off of the approval of these separate sites, electric sites for data centers, also mini nuclear plants, which are and have been proven over the years to be very safe. Also, governments afraid of looking like they're rushing to support those. So until we get governments that responsibly look at what are the real effects of emissions and see that they're actually not negligible but low, and allow these data centers to be built, we're going to see some increasing concern in the stock market related to AI centers. The countries that will move ahead on these, like China, in developing these centers, will outpace us in every area, and I'll let you decide if you think that's a good thing. On the cultural side, as you reflect over the weekend, about 100 shows that we're running, 100 shows we would call television, but put on by the sometimes various new entertainment companies. They've been canceled for 2025. You might think it's only one or two shows. Stranger Things has been canceled, The Handmaid's Tale, not necessarily because they were totally bad. They all ran for a number of seasons with some degree of success, but people tire very quickly of things these days. They want something constantly new. And the other trend that we're seeing in demand on the TV shows, and this is being driven a lot by Gen Z, by people sort of the 18 to 34, 35-year-old crowd. They want shows that are shorter, less episodes, and they want episodes, believe it or not, that are about 10 minutes long. So instead of hour-long episodes that engage maybe the older crowd that are slower thinking, or who knows what the reason could be, shorter episodes, maybe 10 minutes, and they want them to appear authentic. These are some of the things that are driving the consideration among producers in the entertainment world. Late night shows like the Colbert Show, a lot of people were saying they got canceled. It'll be finished up next year because of pressure from Trump and other things. No, the Colbert Show was losing millions and millions of dollars. It appears to be successful and appears to be having great public support, because when you watch that show, of course, there's always about 100 fans, I'll call them real fanatic fans in the audience who like left-leaning so-called comedians. And so every second line, when the so-called comedian says something about government, they all explode in laughter. Do you notice that? Those aren't even, or applause. They explode in applause. Those aren't even applause tracks that are being played. That's just a wild, crazy, frenzied up audience. And so it gives the appearance that it's popular or even funny, the lines that are being said, but in fact, popularity has dropped for Colbert. The show's costing millions and millions of dollars. So companies looking at what type of talk-type shows, cooking shows are seen to be dropping in popularity also. And so in the midst of all of this talk about shorter shows and niche markets, there was just this week a great event in Hollywood, determining on how you define the word great, as the cast and producers of Jaws. And much of the audience listening and watching me right now may not have even been around and probably weren't around. It was 50 years ago. They're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Jaws, that shark movie. And the reason the studios, because we're talking about Richard Dreyfuss here, we're talking about Steven Spielberg. What the feeling is that behind this extravaganza, this big celebration, the 50 year, is to remind people that actually longer movies may actually be still popular, and they want investors to be thinking in terms of don't go away, keep supporting these big and these long blockbuster type movies and longer shows. I'll leave it up to you to decide if the smaller formats are going to be the ones to go, or if shows like Jaws are actually going to take, a bite out of some of these new productions. We'll see what happens. Thanks for tuning in and have a great weekend.